is on. How we doing, everyone? Hopefully everyone's having a great day, and welcome back for another Hornet Security webinar. This one on 6 must-have Microsoft 365 security configurations that every admin needs to know. So my name is Andy Serwich, and I've got with me a good friend of mine, probably somebody who doesn't really require introductions anymore for these webinars because we've seen him so many times. I've got Paul Snackenberg. How's it going, Paul?
I'm good, Andy. How are you?
Doing good, doing good. Hey, I think it's a little bit more of a sane hour there in Australia than it was in our Tuesday session, right? What is it? It's probably late
Maybe.
afternoon there.
It is now 10 o'clock at night, and it
Ah,
was
okay.
6 o'clock in the morning last time we ran this. So I don't know
That's
whether
right.
that defines sane or not. That's whether you're a morning person or an evening person.
Well, for me, the 10 o'clock hour would be better, but I digress. Let's dive into our content here today because I know we have a ton of stuff to get to. So first off, let's talk about our agenda for the day. So we've got, we're gonna do some welcome and introductions. And then we're gonna talk about conditional access policies, SharePoint external sharing settings and access control, identity management, Microsoft information protection, email security settings, and we'll also touch on malicious OAuth applications before we get to our wrap up and Q&A. Now, any one of these points could probably necessitate an entire webinar of its own. So we're gonna be scratching the surface on a lot of these things. We will be doing short demos of each particular item as we walk along. As you have questions, feel free to put them into the questions form and go to webinar. If we can kind of organically address them as we step through the content today, we'll go ahead and do that. Otherwise, we try to get to as many of those during the Q&A section as we can. And even if we don't get to your question, then we always do some sort of follow-up piece of content, either a podcast episode or a video or a written blog post, something. We'll put something out there to make sure that if you ask a question that does not get answered today, we will be sure to get you an answer in some way, shape, or form in the coming days and weeks. So with that, some quick introductions. Again, my name is Andy Serwich. I am a technical evangelist with Hornet Security. I'm also a Microsoft MVP in the cloud and data center management competency, as well as a VMware vExpert. So kind of my background has always been in infrastructure and virtualization and storage, but more recently, in the last couple of years, I've really started diving into, like many of you, diving into cloud services and whatnot. So moving on here, just a couple other ways to get a hold of me if needed. You'll get a copy of the slide deck, so you'll be able to actually click these links that you see here on the screen. But you can reach me on my GitHub profile, github.com/aserwich. That's got all the different ways to get a hold of me if you think of a question after the session today. Or you can reach me on Twitter as well at @aserwich. And Paul, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Thanks very much. That is a flattering photo of me from a few years ago. I had more hair then. I have been in IT for a bit too long, actually. That's hence the baldness. No, that's just genetics. Anyway, I am a Microsoft certified trainer. I have been a trainer for over 2 decades. I have been in IT for close to 3 decades now, which makes me nice and old. I run my own business here in Australia as well as deliver trainings on behalf of Microsoft, and I am on Twitter. I don't tweet a lot, but feel free to reach out to me there. It's probably the easiest and best way to get hold of me. I am also a Dojo editor for articles and other content we make for Hornet Security.
Appreciate that, Paul. Thank you. A little bit of information about Hornet Security, again, the sponsor of today's webinar. So we really see ourselves as the leading cloud email security compliance and backup provider in the market. So our core product that we have in our suite is 365 Total Protection, which really covers all aspects of security for Microsoft 365, from spam to malware to advanced threat protection, legally compliant, archival and encryption, all kinds of different stuff. We also include backup and recovery of all M365 data as well. I'm going to get into some more details on that a little bit later today. A little bit more about us. All of our development is done in-house. So from initial concept of an idea to final product, everything is done in-house. And we also have an in-house security lab. It's a team of international security experts. Their whole job is 24/7 monitoring of email traffic and threats, continuous evaluation, analysis, and reporting of all of those email threats as well. A little bit more about us from a timeline perspective. So we've been around for 15 years now. Got our start back in 2007. And more recently, if you kind of get up to the top of the chart here, we've been making a lot of strategic acquisitions to round out our security portfolio. That way we can focus on the security on your behalf, and you can focus on what it is that you and your organization does. So I always like to start these conversations with kind of a poll question to get an idea of where you guys are at. And what we'll start with here is just, I want to find out what your biggest barrier to implementing security solutions in M365 is. And we do this because it helps Paul and I kind of frame the conversation a little bit. Maybe we touch on certain areas a little bit more heavily based on your responses here. And it really kind of helps us bring clarity to presenting the material to you in hopefully the most effective way possible. So, so yeah, you've got lack of knowledge here, budget issues, lack of resources/time, no buy-in from upper management, or too much complexity. I think our prediction on Tuesday when we launched this, Paul, was lack of resources/time as the top one. Is that,
Yeah.
do you think that stands for this one too? I think it does myself.
Yeah, I think so too. Although lack of knowledge was very close, I think.
It was. So let's see where we ended up here. So this mirrors almost exactly our Tuesday session. So lack of
Yeah.
resources and time being the number one, with lack of knowledge coming in at a very, very close second. What's also interesting to me here in the findings, I'm really happy to see that no buy-in from upper management is only 5%. I'm really happy to see that, because that's an issue I've seen several times in past career positions I've had. So it's
I
nice
think
to.
that's changing though. I think that's changing. I think 5 years ago that would absolutely have been true. I don't think you can be in upper management and ignore it now. Like it's so much in mainstream
Right,
media, so it's a bit hard
definitely.
to say no, we don't need it. It's fine. We'll be
I
fine.
know, definitely. So yes, I'm glad to see that changing as well. All right, well, thank you all for that. I also want to share some statistics, because I always like to have these conversations through the frame of data, right? So starting with some data. So we ran a survey here recently in the last month or two, and we just published the findings about a week ago, where we basically, the whole crux of the survey was focused on security inside of Microsoft 365 as well as compliance. And so one of the things that we asked was like, hey, how many security features are you using in Microsoft 365? So this particular chart is very similar to the one I'm going to show you in just a second, but there's a subtle difference here. So in this particular chart, on the bottom, we've got number of security features enabled, basically, right? And the vertical column is the percentage of companies that reported an IT security incident in the last 12 months. So what you can see here is that as you move to more security features on the right-hand side, the rate of reported incidences actually goes up. And when we're looking at this, we're like, why is this? It's kind of strange, right? You'd think more security features, you'd have less incidents. And what we figured is either a couple of things or a combination of a couple of things, right? The first thing we thought is like, well, they've been under attack this whole time. They've been having security incidents this whole time, and now they're just aware of it, right? Because they've got these tools in place. Or the other thing that we thought was maybe, okay, they're implementing more security features, which means their security footprint is more complicated, and that opens the door for misconfigurations and things like that, right? And maybe a false sense of security, like, hey, I've got all these great security features, I don't really have to keep a close eye on this anymore. So we think that that could potentially be part of it as well. So moving on to the next graph here, you're gonna say, wait, this looks really similar, Andy. Well, so the one we had previously, the red, was the percentage of companies that reported issues. This is just purely the rate of security incidences versus the amount of features enabled. So kind of similar, but a little bit different. The one thing I wanted to call out here, because you may see it in the official report if you come across that survey, is the 12 on the horizontal axis here, the 12 number, and the double goose eggs, the 0 on the right hand side. We only had one respondent that's using 12 security features, and they didn't report any security incidences. So I kind of ignore that one just because the sample size is a single company there. But the rest of the data, we had a large sample size for all the other options here, and kind of the same thing here, right? You know, we had a couple of organizations report that they had one security feature enabled and they had 40%, and then it dips down for a little bit and comes back up, that matching kind of what we saw on the previous slide. So interesting data here as well. So in terms of those security features that organizations are enabling, we wanted to see what features they're using specifically. So we see that the heavy hitters here for most organizations are spam filtration, MFA. Really happy to see 82% of people using MFA, so that's really cool. Web traffic filtration, permissions management, and security awareness training. Those are all kind of like the heavy hitters here. The one thing that's interesting, especially in correlation with the next data point I'm going to talk to you about, is the SIM solution down at the bottom of this graph. So we see that only 14% of organizations are using some sort of SIM solution, which then we go into the next data point here. This is the rate of IT security incidences reported by which measures are in place. So we see here, SIM solution is the very top of the list. So 42% of companies that are using a SIM solution reported an IT security incident. And if you think about that, that makes sense because that's what SIM is designed to do. It's designed to bring security incidents, awareness of them to the surface so that you know they're happening. So that makes all kinds of sense. And then if you look at the next couple of bullet points there from underneath SIM solution, you know, IT team access auditing and just-in-time access, email encryption, IT security awareness training, web traffic filtration. A lot of these are designed to bring additional security incidences up to you know, up to the surface. And that's, yeah, so there's not really any surprises here, I guess is what I'm saying, in terms of the top 4 or 5 items here based on this data point. So the one last thing I want to leave you with before we really dive into our content here is this statistic, and that is we found that slightly more than half of organizations do not have a change tracking or review process in place. And regardless of what features you're using in the security realm today, regardless of which features you walk away from this webinar and start implementing in the coming days and weeks, I would highly recommend, if you don't have a change tracking or review process in place today, you know, get one in place, because that will go a long way to helping you keep an eye on potential security issues within your organization, both from a change tracking perspective and a continuous review process of your infrastructure as well. Now, let's talk about conditional access. So first off, what is conditional access? So conditional access basically makes the identity authentication process in Microsoft 365 better. It basically allows you to wrap conditions and require certain factors to complete the authentication process for an end user. So you can do things like, okay, you know, maybe I've got a sales team that they're on the road using their mobile devices a lot, right, every day. And I want to make sure that if that salesperson is trying to access data in Microsoft 365 and they're on the road using one of their mobile devices, I'm going to require that they go through a multi-factor authentication prompt every time they try to access that information. Or conversely, you know, for my end users that are in the office, they're, you know, within the 4 walls of my business, and I deem that as a quote unquote safe location, I can require that, okay, if they're logging in from that location, maybe we don't require multi-factor authentication, right? So that's kind of what conditional access allows you to do. It allows you to do a couple of things like that and really, you know, make the identity process much easier, much more tailored for your organization's specific needs. So I don't want to kill anyone with PowerPoint, so let's hop over to a demo environment. And you should be able to see the conditional access lab. Paul, can you confirm real quick that you can see that?
I can, which is fabulous.
Perfect. Good. All right, so this is just my very small demo environment, but perfect place here to kind of show you what conditional access is. So with conditional access, you come in here to the Azure Active Directory Admin Center. go to enterprise applications, and then conditional access, and it will drop you on this screen. And you've got a couple of different things that you can do in here. So the first one I'll show you is this feature that's in preview, but really handy for most people is the new policy from template. So if I want to create a new conditional access policy from a template and just keep things nice and simple for myself, that's what this particular feature does. And what Microsoft has done is they've kind of packaged together the most commonly used conditional access policies within templates to make it easily to roll them out and deploy it. So I come in here and I can say, hey, do I want to go target this particular policy at identities or maybe devices? So let's say I want to target this at devices specifically. And then I get the option of selecting a template. So I can see all of these different options that are in here as templates. So let's say I want to block access for unknown or unsupported devices, right? And the nice thing about these templates is I can drill in here and I can see what the summary of the policy is. So we can see here for this particular policy, you know, included users is all users. Excluded user is the current user, so the user that you're using to create the policy is not affected by it, which apps are impacted, and the excluded device platform. So basically this policy is going to allow access to any platform that is in the exclude list here. So any platform that falls outside of these categories will be blocked from accessing cloud resources. So that's basically what this template does. And again, you've got a number of different options here in the template section. Now, I want to go back here. I'm going to discard that session and go back and look at new policy specifically. So new policy here is like if I want to create my own custom policy and not use one of the templates, right? So you have to name your policy. So I'm going to say, I don't know, mobile device restrictions. You name it whatever you want based on your organization's naming convention. Then you have to target, you know, which users this is going to apply to. You can do users or groups or all users. The nice thing about the UI here is that if you are doing something that could potentially target the account you're creating the policy with, it will notify you here. So typically you want to exclude, especially you want to exclude your break glass accounts in Azure AD. So if you're not aware, a break glass account would be an account that is set up as a global admin in M365, and you basically track that username and password on a piece of paper and lock it away in a safe somewhere. Basically, it's an account that is only ever used if you manage to lock all your other accounts out of Azure Active Directory and M365 in general. So you typically want to exclude break glass accounts from any policies that could affect the login and authentication process. But for the purposes of this demo, we're just going to select all users here, and we will move on to cloud apps. So basically, you know, we've decided, hey, this policy is affected to all users. What are they trying to access? You know, how are we? What do they have to be accessing for this policy to go into effect, right? And so we got a number of different options here: cloud apps, user actions, or like an authentication context. An authentication context would be like, okay, they're already within some sort of one of the M365 cloud applications, and they start accessing sensitive data within that cloud application, and then you prompt them for additional security controls. That's what an authentication context allows you to do. It's further into the application than just accessing the application at the get-go. Let's say we're going to do cloud apps, and we can select all cloud apps or selected applications. So if I do selected applications, I have basically any application that has been authorized into my M365 tenants. And if I want to just do your basic Office 365 applications, I can select that. And then we go into the condition section here. Now, we've got all different kinds of things and controls that we can do within this. So I'll do kind of what we did with the template earlier, right? Let's say if I got any user in my tenant that's trying to access any of the core M365 apps from a mobile platform, you know, I can do that here. So we'll configure this. And if they are trying to access these resources from Android, iOS, or Windows Phone. I don't know who still uses Windows Phone, but it's in the list. I love Windows Phone. I do miss Windows Phone sometimes. Anyway, so we're targeting this at all users using any of those mobile device platforms, and we will grant them access assuming they do a MFA prompt. that's basically what this checkbox is doing. But we have a number of different options here. And at that point, we're pretty much done. We got some session controls in here as well. For the sake of time, I'm not going to go through each of these, but you can get a little bit more information from each of these informational boxes here. And then the nice thing is, once you've got your policy all configured, by default, it will go into report only mode, so you can kind of see how it's going to function, or you can turn it on or off. And along those lines, if I go back out to the conditional access dashboard here, you've got this what if button. And again, for the sake of time, I'm not going to go through this, but this tool you can use to kind of get an idea of like, okay, in certain situations with certain policies, what would the behavior look like, right? So it's kind of that perfect what if I did this thing tool to help you determine what's going to happen, you know, before you really dive in and enable any policies. So anyway, again, crash course on conditional access. But I think now we're going to pass it over to Paul for SharePoint external share settings, I believe. So Paul, I'm going to go ahead and make you the presenter. All right, make presenter. You should get the prompt there, my friend.
Fabulous. And can you verify that you can see my screen?
I can see the slide deck. Looks good.
Fabulous. Excellent. All right. So I'm going to answer a couple of questions here because we got a few questions came in, and I think that's important. We want to deal with those now. How do you explain the importance of a security to a company that's never had a known breach? I would implement some end user training, some fake phishing. So you can do this yourselves. There's a few open source sort of toolkits around. I can't remember a name at the moment, but there are a few around. And then of course there's paid services. If you have Microsoft 365 E5 licensing, it's built in. So you can use the built-in attack simulator in Microsoft 365. Start hitting your users with fake emails and see if they start clicking on them. And then you tell the boss, look, if this had been real, we would have been compromised at this point. That's one simple answer. I suppose there's a few other ones. I can't hear you, Andy.
Oh, there we go. I had muted myself. But I have to say, I have to jump in really quick. We do have security awareness training coming to the Hornet Security product suite in the near future. So anyway,
there you go.
Shameless plug there.
That's fine. To carry on with Rick's question here, no, sorry, Gavin's question first. So Microsoft Azure Active Directory has built-in two-factor authentication. You can use phone call, text message. Don't use those unless you absolutely have to. You can use the Authenticator app from Microsoft, which is free. You can use a third-party Authenticator app on your phone, or you can use YubiKeys, 2FA keys. All of those work. Single sign-on built into Azure Active Directory as well. So well worth looking at. Rick's question, yes, we will try to mention licensing where required. All of the conditional access that Andy just covered is all Azure Active Directory Premium P1. So Plan 1 is required to use conditional access. The SharePoint settings I'm about to show, no extra licensing, no particular licensing required. Neil, once you have used the conditional access policy in report only mode, it shows up in the logs. So you can go and filter that and see this particular CA policy gave me this result. So these users would have been blocked had I had it in enforce mode. Legacy per user MFA needs to be disabled for conditional access to work. No, Chris, that is not true. I'm using that with some of my clients, and I can turn on per user MFA, which does not require any particular licensing, and I can use conditional access together. Works a treat. What you can't do is you can't do enable MFA with conditional access policies at the same time as having per user MFA. But, you know, yes, that is still best practices. For James' questions, Steph refused to put that app on personal phones, so use phone call or text. Look, Brian, that is an age-old battle. Multi-factor authentication is a tricky one. Users refuse to put it on their phone. Look, depending on which country you're in and how much pull you have with your legal department, I would put it into your contract. You want to come and work for us, you put the Authenticator app on the phone. That's just how it is. You don't want to work for us, that's fine. We don't do anything else. We're not monitoring your phone. We're not enrolling it in MDM, but you have to. What directory services would you recommend for mixed OS environments, Windows, Mac, and Unix? I would stick with Azure Active Directory because that's how we roll.
Yep.
Now I'm going to get to my demos, and Andy, feel free to interrupt me if you if you see any questions that I should definitely deal with.
Will do.
Okay, so sharing documents is part of modern collaboration. It happens in all businesses of all sizes, but you want to have some guardrails around it. So in the book, this whole webinar is based on a book that is available for free. You'll get the slide towards the end with a link to it. And it is 10 chapters chock full of all sorts of recommendations, and the chapter 11 is a checklist where you can tick off that you completed them, all about security for Microsoft 365. This is part of chapter 4, and here we're talking about sharing and sharing documents. Now, there's a few different places in classic Microsoft fashion to set these, and you also want to have some alerts so you know when this sharing is going on. Now, if you're a 10,000 company business, you probably want to tune those alerts a little bit so that you don't have, drowning in them. So let's do a quick demo if I can find the right window, which is this one here. So first place is in the Microsoft 365 Admin Center, and I have gone to Settings, Org Settings, Services, SharePoint. So down here under SharePoint, I can do some settings for external sharing. I can set up who users can share with, only people internally, only people who are already part of our tenant, they've already been invited to our tenant. I can invite new users by sharing a document with them, or anyone, and you can do, anonymous links. Probably don't pick that one, but that's all that's here. Then there is one other place, because Microsoft, so we go to security and privacy, and we go down to sharing, and this is where you can set the effect that users can add new guests to the organization, right? So ordinary users can invite people who are not part of your tenant. Now they get a guest account and they can access shared documents. But the real magic happens in the SharePoint Admin Center. I've gone to the SharePoint Admin Center, policies, sharing, and here I can set up that I'm going for new and existing guests. Now notice OneDrive cannot be more permissive than SharePoint, right? It can be less permissive, but not more. And then we got some other external sharing settings here. You can limit it to certain domains. You can limit so that only certain groups internally to your organization can share documents. I can expire links after X number of days, in this case 90. And by default, I'm going to set it up so that the links are view only, read only links, but obviously the user can pick when they are sharing that they want to give an edit link. So that's that when it comes to SharePoint and sharing. And I mentioned the alert policy. So I've gone to the security.microsoft.com, gone down to email and collaboration, gone to policies and rules, clicked on alert policy, and I'm going to create a new alert policy. So SharePoint and OneDrive external sharing, and fabulous if we can spell. And I'm going to pick the severity as low. I'm going to pick the category as information governance. And I'm going to select the activity as sharing, shared file externally. Every time an activity matches the rule, I want to have that sent to my email address, and I'm going to finish that. That's it. Now I have an alert policy, I get an email. Obviously, you want to tie that into your SIEM if that's what you've got to deal with. Okay, I'll head over to next up, identity management. Anything I need to deal with in the meantime, Andy? No?
Nope, looking good. I'm answering a few in the chat while you do your thing.
Fabulous, appreciate that. So since we released the book, Microsoft came out with a new portal called Entra. This gives us a home for Azure Active Directory, Cloud and Identity Entitlement Management, so CIEM, which is the CloudKnox acquisition, and verifiable identity. We're going to focus on Azure Active Directory here, but we do have a good article on Entra on our blog. So step number one, please turn on MFA. Please turn on MFA for all administrators. If you're not, you shouldn't be in IT. And if at all possible, make sure you have MFA turned on for ordinary users. Step number two, once you've done that, because even though you've turned MFA on, the bad guys can still get in without doing MFA because they can use the legacy protocols. You've got to disable those. If you're a smaller organization and you don't want to deal with a lot of complexity and you don't want to bother with conditional access policies, use the security defaults, turn them on, and everybody gets MFA with the app only. If you have administrators in a larger organization, use privileged identity management. Back to the licensing question, that's Azure Active Directory Premium P2, but you only need to buy that for the few administrators that you have. When they want to do an administrative task, they are normally an ordinary user. They are eligible to be an administrator. They sign into the Azure portal and they ask to be elevated. And then you can have a workflow around that with MFA. Maybe they have to be approved by somebody else, whatever else might happen. And then they become an administrator for a short amount of time. Another good thing to do is branding your logon pages so that when users are sent a fake or a real phishing email and they click on the link because they're tired that day and they end up on a sign-in page where they're about to hand over their credentials to the bad guys, it will look like the standard Microsoft 365 sign-in page, not your customized one. So that's one little visual cue that might help your users a little bit. Lighten the load on your help desk so they can focus on more important stuff by having self-service password reset built in. It's part of Azure Active Directory. Requires P1, I want to say off the top of my head. And unified auditing, make sure you have that turned on. It's on by default if you created your tenant after 2019, I think, but if not, make sure it's turned on. Covered in the book. So quick Entra demo. So this is the Entra portal. I've got my home tab here where we can see the different parts of Entra. Then I've got all of Azure Active Directory over on the left. I've got permissions management and I've got verified ID. I'm just going to hit on this small slice of company branding here for this particular user so that we have a custom background, custom logo, so that when a user tries to sign into this organization, they see the logo, they see the background, they know, oh, this is home, this is our tenant, so this is where we're going to go. And finally, a very quick cut in here for conditional access. Use the block legacy authentication template. Now, Microsoft is about to start in October, off the top of my head, to actually start turning these off anyway, whether you have or not. But if you want to have some control, so things don't start breaking in your organization, maybe you have scripts that run, maybe you have printers and scanner that sends scanned documents into Office 365, and you don't want to be surprised by these things, go and deal with this yourself and have a good look at it, because there's like 13 different protocols that are part of legacy authentication. So you want to cover those there and create a conditional access policy for it. Right, and my final demo, and I am completely aware that we're running through this at like warp speed, but there you are. We're fitting it into the webinar. So for more information and shameless plug, read the book. So Microsoft Information Protection. This is a whole big area where you can do lots of cool stuff. So you require Microsoft 365 E3 licensing to do this, and some of the auto labeling requires E5. So first I'm going to show you Content Explorer to find out what you've actually got in your tenant. That doesn't require any licensing whatsoever. It requires a couple of permissions, but no extra licensing. Then we're going to cover sensitive information types to identify sensitive data in your documents. And then we're going to talk very briefly about data loss prevention and labels and policies everywhere, because this is not just in email, it's not just in documents, this is in Teams, it's in SharePoint, it's in OneDrive, it's all over the place. And it is coming to a tenant near you, because I think there's more and more regulations around the world enforcing these things, and they are cool. So quick-ish demo again. I can find the right tab. There we are. So I have gone to what's now called the Purview portal, so compliance.microsoft.com, gone to data classification, I've gone to Content Explorer. I am a global admin in this tenant. It's my own business tenant, but I've also assigned myself 2 additional permissions: Content Explorer Content Viewer and Content Explorer List Viewer. Obviously, you want to be very cautious with those permissions, because these users can actually see content that they normally wouldn't have permissions to. But for the purposes of investigating what do I have in my tenant, this gives you a good indication. Again, without turning anything on, having no policies, no nothing, you just need to have auditing turned on. And I can see that in my tenant, I have over 10,000 mentions of physical addresses. I have 4,600 Australian business numbers. Some of these are clearly misidentifications, because then I don't have New Zealand physical addresses, at least not that many, I shouldn't think. I have some Australian company numbers and a few other things down here. IP addresses is in here and being mentioned. And we got more of them, including Malta tax ID number. There you go. But if I go in and look at the Australian business number here as an example, I can see I got 1,500 in Exchange. And if I go into Exchange, this is a very small tenant because it's my business, but you could have, you know, hundreds of mailboxes in here, and we could see how much of this do we actually have in our organization. In this case, it's my mailbox, and I'm going to get a list of emails. And if I go and pick something here like an invoice, I could go, I can see there's another 4 sensitive information types in this particular document, and I could open this up and actually see it, right? And I can see what the information in that email was. So the point is that this gives you an indication of what you have, you know, false identifications notwithstanding, what do I have in my tenant? Then you can move on to actually starting to look at information protection. You start off with labels. There's over 230 or something built-in sensitive information types that automatically identify sensitive data. I have picked one here because creating one from scratch takes too long, but I've got Australian personally identifiable information. And if I edit this label here and have a look at what it says, I've got some descriptions, and then I've got some scope. In this case, this is going to go for files and emails, and I'm going to encrypt files and emails, and I'm going to mark the content of the files. And I'm going to ask users to configure permissions when they label a document, or when the system automatically identifies that there is personally identifiable information in the document, and it's going to suggest to the user that, hey, you need to apply a label here. And I'm going to put content marking in, which is a footer, Australian PII highly sensitive. I am not going to do auto labeling here, but I am looking at, actually I am, but I'm identifying Australian bank account numbers, driver license number, our Medicare number over here, passport numbers, tax file numbers, business numbers, and company numbers. Replace this with your country and you'll see what is in here. So there is, as I said, if I go to sensitive information types here, there's 264 in here from all over the world of all sorts of different sensitive information types, all built in. Okay, so that's the label, and we're going to get out of that. And then I go and publish the label so that it can actually be used with, in this case, the label policy, which literally just lets me pick the users and group I'm going to publish this to, which label to pick, and asking the users to provide a justification if they're going to remove the label or downgrade it. And I got some more settings here. I can require users to every time apply a label to a document or an email. That's going to get old real quick. So make sure you train your users if you're going to use that setting. And then we have a name and finalized settings. So let's have a quick look at what that looks like. I am in a Word document here with a sensitive information type inside of it. It hasn't actually identified it automatically. And I don't want to wait for that to happen. Let me see if I save it, but I don't think it's going to pick it up. No, it's not going to. So I'm going to do it manually. So up here, I have the sensitivity button in Word, and I'm going to pick the Australia PII, and I'm going to replace the I've already tested it before. So I'm going to restrict permissions on this document, and I'm going to give Andy read-only access. Andy.com, because you've got that email address, don't you? So I'm going to set that permission on the document, and I am going to, the footer is automatically going to arrive because of the label policy. Now, if I email this document to Andy, the email would automatically be encrypted. He would get it. He would have to authenticate who he was, and it doesn't matter. He doesn't have to have a Microsoft 365 tenant or anything, but he has to authenticate to the document, and he gets access to it. I think we said by default 30 days or something, and that's it. So that's how we deal with sensitive information. And back to you, Andy.
I'm up again. All right. So really quick, let me grab share again, make presenter, and we want to show the slide deck again. You should be able to see PowerPoint now. Just
email security settings.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you for the awesome demos. That's, like you mentioned, the kind of going through a lot of this stuff at a breakneck speed, right? But like I know MIP itself, we could spend easily an entire hour just talking about that. Great feature. Highly suggest you check it out. And if you want more information, like Paul said earlier, check out the book. We're going to be showing a link to that here in just a little bit. So now, with some of the time we have left, let's talk about some email security settings, and then we'll get to our extra resources and wrap-up section after that. So in terms of email security, that's kind of baked into Microsoft 365. You've got Exchange Online Protection is kind of your base level of protection. It doesn't matter what SKU of M365 licensing you get. Even if you have Exchange Online Plan 1, literally a mailbox, you still get Exchange Online Protection. And really what it is it's a collection of a couple of different filtering mechanisms that scans email as it flows into M365. And the spam detection rate of EOP is 99%. And the question always comes up when I'm having this conversation is like, hey, is 99% enough, right? And that's one of the things that we've looked at here at Hornet Security is like, hey, from the perspective of scale, is 99% good enough? And this particular chart, we kind of looked at it from the standpoint of like, what's the lost productivity and just having to deal with those spam messages. So in this case, we've got a million spam emails, right? And depending on the size of your organization, that may sound completely reasonable and normal, or that may sound like a lot if you're a small organization. But for the sample size here, we have a million spam emails, and a 99% spam detection rate will allow 10,000 of those emails through. And let's say your end user spends a minute looking at each piece of spam, and we know it's not just going to be a minute, right? Because you're going to have some users that, they pitch the email and the deleted items and they don't give it a second thought. But you're also going to have those end users that are going to pick up the phone. They're going to call IT and be like, hey, I got this weird looking email. What should I do about it? Now a ticket is created. A tech has to call the end user. It has to look at it. It turns into way more than a minute, right? But for the sake of this conversation, we're going to say that on average, a minute spent looking at each piece of those 10,000 spam emails comes out to 167 hours of lost productivity. Now, underneath, you've got a spam detection rate of 99.9%, which is what we have in our 365 total protection suite. Basically, it comes down to only 1,000 getting through and 16.7 hours of lost time. So, when we're talking about quantities of scale, that extra 0.9% does matter. So talking a little bit more about Exchange Online Protection and where we've seen some hiccups and people run into problems over the years. is, first off, Exchange Online Protections Detection Guarantee does not apply to non-English emails. So if you're an organization that you work in multiple languages, the detection guarantee does not apply again to non-English emails. And this this document that you're seeing down the bottom left-hand corner of the screen, this is actually from the SLA document for Microsoft 365. Now, the other thing that it doesn't include is the SLA does not include zero-day threats. So reading between the lines here in this other section of the documents, you know, a virus is considered known when widely used commercial virus scanning engines can detect the virus, and the detection capability is available throughout the EOP network. Now, reading between the lines there, 0 days are not included in the detection SLA. And again, just looking at like previous reports, so back in 2019, there was a BSI report that came out that said, hey, there's 114 million new malware programs in just that year alone, and we know it's only gotten worse since then. So you could also go to Defender for Microsoft 365. So that is kind of the next tier up. And in terms of licensing, you know, it creates some licensing headaches. You know, it's a decent product, it does a good job, but there are some licensing headaches and some other considerations around it. So in terms of licensing, you can apply Defender to any of these particular SKUs of M365. Or you can, well, those licenses I showed you right here, they will give you Defender for 365, or you can add it on as an add-on to any of these SKUs here. And Paul will likely agree with me. We actually did a podcast episode just on the complexity of Microsoft 365 licensing. And anybody who's done a true up of Microsoft 365 licensing will know that hey, licensing in M365 is difficult at the best of times. And there's also the cost angle associated with Defender for 365 as well too. So I mean, Microsoft really pushes you towards the core packages, right? So E5, E3, F3. Now, depending on your region or whether you're going with the 12-month pay ahead for the discount or you're paying monthly, your pricing may be a little bit different than this, right? Or if you get it through a partner that has a discount, whatever, your pricing may be a little different than this. Point is you know, getting Defender can add a significant cost to your detection capabilities. That's where kind of like a third-party option comes in and is really helpful for not only that, but for a couple of other reasons as well too, right? I kind of already mentioned the licensing is complicated in M365. Again, using us as an example, we don't care what license your users are licensed with. They just need to be licensed with a M365 license of some sort, right? And the other thing, I've talked with a lot of auditors over the last year or two here, where you know, we're starting to see this this term in the industry really crop up more and more frequently lately, and that is the term of vendor over dependence. And you know, leveraging Microsoft 365 for productivity, a lot of organizations are doing that, and it's a great platform for productivity, collaboration, fantastic platform. There's some auditors I've talked to that when pairing the productivity tools with the security capabilities also from Microsoft, now you're in a situation where like, hey, the factory owner is also the compliance inspector, right? It's like the basketball referee is kind of also a player, right? So it creates kind of this conflict of interest, and depending on the auditor you talk to, some of them feel a little icky about that, kind of a gray area. So that's another consideration to make there. In terms of third-party options, a couple other things here to mention. Great for multi-tenant solutions. You know, like I said, I already talked about the separation there, and typically you'll get a higher quality of support from a third-party provider as well. So while Paul has a second to kind of dig through and look at the questions, I'm going to hop over to a demo environment really quick and just really quick show you 365 total protection. So again, this is our security suite that kind of wraps around and adds a second layer of security to Microsoft 365. And this particular view that you're seeing here is kind of the email security live tracking view. If you are an organization that has multiple Microsoft 365 tenants, or maybe you're a service provider, the tool is multi-tenant. So you'll be able to choose which tenant that you want to work with in this top right view. For the purposes of this demo, we're just working with onesurf.net here. and this is the default view. The default view will show you all of the email that has flowed through the product today. So we see here 6:30 is the current date, and you can manipulate this. You can change the data and the view in this particular view however you want. But the one thing I kind of wanted to point out here is the different detection types here. So green generally is good. So the light green is a clean email that was delivered through. The darker green is info mail, like a newsletter or something like that. But obviously red is bad, right? So we see like an orange is a threat, or like a darker red is an advanced threat. So this particular one here we see is determined to be a threat, and we could drill into that and get a little bit more information as to why it was labeled as a threat. So here we see the reason being malicious URL. So there's a URL contained within that piece of email that goes to a known malicious site, and that is why it was blocked. You can get a little bit more information on our detection labels right in our documentation contained at the top of the control panel here under manual. But the other nice thing here is you can see kind of the percentages based on your view settings of threat versus spam versus advanced threat, the different types of detection within the tool. And the final area I wanted to show really quick while we have a minute or two yet is the security settings view here. This is where you'll see like a lot of the different security settings that are contained within the product. And we were talking about Microsoft Information Protection earlier. So I wanted to make sure that I kind of pointed out the compliance filter here. So this would provide some of those same capabilities, but right within this tool along with all of our other features. So like, if I want to create a rule for outgoing email, so emails leaving the organization, if I wanted to, I could come in here and basically put in a pattern where I could detect, hey, this is a credit card number trying to leave the organization. You can do that with this tool and things just like that. So I wanted to point that out as well. The other interesting thing that I wanted to point out here that's useful for some organizations, especially when there's an outage of Microsoft 365, which are rare, but they do happen, and there was one just last week that impacted North America and Europe, if I remember correctly. So we do have a continuity service baked into the application as well too. So if there's an extended outage, you can log into a web portal, and your end users can continue to work and continue to access their email, until once Microsoft 365 comes back online, then they can continue to work normally at that case. But at least here they have a web portal they can go to, and they can continue to work during that outage, which is handy. So with that, I know we have about 10 minutes left. I'm gonna hop back over to the slide deck. And we have a couple of other things to talk about here. Just a real brief mention of malicious OAuth applications. We covered in this a previous webinar, so we're not going to dig into it too much. I'm going to give you a link to that webinar. But real quick, what is a malicious OAuth app? So you could have a situation where you have a compromised Microsoft 365 tenant. A threat actor could go ahead and create a malicious OAuth application, publish it up into Azure AD, and then use that to try and trick end users into providing access into the tenant. And what's so insidious about this particular type of attack is, the end user will get this particular prompt. We're all used to seeing this prompt, right? Hey, I have this third-party tool I want to use. I'm going to require these permissions. Well, a threat actor can fashion a malicious application that asks for these permissions, and as soon as the end user allows it, what is so insidious about that is once the permissions are given, it doesn't matter if the end user changes their password or turns on MFA. Once the permissions are given, the application has those level of permissions. So it's persistent even through password changes and MFA changes as well. There's a couple of things that you can do to kind of control this real quick while we still have a few minutes. You want to control application consent. So the new default is actually allow user consent for apps from verified publishers. So that middle option there, it used to be by default new tenants, anyone could verify any application, right? But you want to make sure you come in here, you take a look and double check your settings in here to make sure that you're controlling who can actually provide rights to applications that are asking for it. The other thing that you want to do on a regular basis is what I call the human aspect of IT security, and that is on a regular basis, go into the enterprise application section of Azure AD, review this list of applications, make sure that they all actually need to be there, who gave access to the application and why. And if you see anything in there that looks a little bit strange, you want to make sure you go in and you revoke that access. So if you want a little bit more information on this than I just went into in that couple of minutes there, like I said, we did do a different webinar on this particular case where we went into a lot more detail on this. Again, you're going to get a copy of this slide deck, so you'll be able to just click on the link on the bottom of the slide here, and it'll take you right to that webinar where you can watch it on demand. Now, I've talked about Hornet Security 365 Total Protection quite a bit already, so I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this slide. I just want to point out that we have multiple SKUs of the product. So we've got business, enterprise, and enterprise backup that contain varying degrees of capabilities within each of those SKUs. Whenever I talk about backup inside of our product, I always like to point out the shared responsibility model. So if you're not familiar with what the shared responsibility model is it's a model that Microsoft has come up with and part of their cloud services. So basically the model states that, hey, we, Microsoft, are responsible for the application, the infrastructure, and the networking, whereas you, the consumer of M365, you are responsible for the user access and the data security, which would include backup and recovery of that data, right? So M365 as a platform is really good at data retention, but it's not designed for recovery. And there are a couple of things that you need to consider when you're talking about, data safety in Microsoft 365. You've got your typical unauthorized data access, ransomware attacks. So there are ransomware attacks in the wild today that are able to, encrypt Microsoft 365 tenants. You got malware, viruses. We talked about OAuth, malicious OAuth applications. You've got your typical user error. You've got limitations of features as well. So the thing that always comes up in this conversation is, e-discovery. I talk to a lot of organizations that they try to use e-discovery for recovery of M365 data. And I mean, it's like trying to use a screwdriver to pound in a nail. I mean, e-discovery is great at what it does. It's not designed for recovery of data. So there's some limitations of features there. So couple of wrap-up items. I always like to wrap up with a poll question. So our second poll question here, let me go ahead and launch that. And this poll question is, hey, choose two of the security features that we've talked about today. Which of those are the most critical to your organization? And the reason we do this is we get a little bit of information from you to help us figure out, like, hey, what content might be helpful for you. So, for example, if a lot of you say, hey, we feel that conditional access and MIP are the two most critical to our business, we would then go out and create some videos or maybe some written articles specifically about those topics. So we always try to cater to what you guys are looking for and what you need. So I'm going to leave that open here for just another couple of seconds. All right, and close that poll and share the results. So the two winners are email security features and conditional access. So yes, thank you for that. Identity management was a close third there as well. So pretty even spread here. So yeah, definitely we'll be working on some content around these angles. Thank you for sharing that information, and it helps us get you the content that you guys are most interested in. A couple other resources here. So we got some resources to the various Hornet Security website stuff. So we got the Hornet Security website here at the top, link to 365 Total Protection, as well as a link to the Hornet Security blog, and also a baseline security article from Microsoft contained down there at the bottom as well. And ebook. So we've been talking about the ebook throughout the session today. Fantastic ebook. Paul did an amazing job with this. Paul, I'll let you talk about your ebook here really briefly. You explain it better than I do.
Thanks very much. So we put together this ebook for anybody who's responsible for a Microsoft 365 tenant. It has a long list of security configurations, why you should be turning them on, where you should be turning them on, and as I said, it's got the checklist. So, and it's a free download, so it's well worth going and having a look at, I think. It's if I say so myself, considering I wrote it. So.
No, you did a fantastic job with it. It's a great resource, and those checklists are super helpful as well. So well done, my friend. All right. One thing I also wanted to wrap up with, give Paul just a couple of extra seconds to look at the questions here, is how would you like us to follow up? So what you can do here is we've got 4 choices. Just select your choice, put that into the questions form, and just hit enter. And that kind of tells us how you want us to follow up with you. So, select number 1 if you want us to send you some more content or newsletters. Select number 2 if you'd like to get a free trial of our 365 Total Protection product. Select number 3 if you'd like to talk with a specialist about the product, or maybe you have questions about our pricing or anything like that. Or if you just want us to leave you the heck alone, that's completely fine too. That's what number 4 is. You can select option 4, and we promise we will not pester you if you select option 4. And that brings us to our questions section. So Paul, I've seen quite a few questions coming in.
You're not kidding. You're
Yeah,
not
quite a few
kidding.
questions.
Yeah. So I think we've answered quite a few of them verbally. I am, written, in written format. I don't think we'll be able to get to all of them, but I did want to pick up a couple of good ones, and we will follow up with an article where we answer all of them, I think, to get to the answer there. So we answered the question on report mode for conditional access, policies. Let's see, directory services, yeah, we covered that one. Right, a good question from Scott. If you require MFA for all users in your tenant, using conditional access policies, what does this do to guest users in the tenant? You can actually have specific policies for the guest users, but what happens today is that if they are also Microsoft 365 users in their own tenants and they are being enforced MFA there, today, barring preview, there is no way for you to trust their MFA or for them to trust your MFA, meaning that it's just going to prompt them twice. But cross-tenant collaboration settings is currently in preview. It underlies shared channels in Teams, and it also affects this. And one of the things you can do now is you can say, if you're coming from another Azure Active Directory tenant, but you're a guest user in our tenant, but you have performed an MFA in your tenant, we're going to trust that MFA. And now they're only going to get prompted once. If they're not doing MFA in their tenant, you can of course still have a policy to do MFA in your tenant. So well worth looking into that. Then we had a question around, sorry, Andy.
As I say, there's one I wanted to make sure we got to. It's kind of a use case question. So we've got a user here that said they've got a use case for SharePoint sharing, where they've got a kind of an internal marketing site that they've got a few folders that they want to share with like an external creative agency, right? Doesn't want the agency to be able to access the entire SharePoint site, but kind of sending them separate links for each folder. It doesn't feel like that's a great solution. Just want to see what your recommendation would be on that particular one, Paul.
I don't have a better solution.
Yeah, that's kind of where I was at too. I was hoping you had some secret sauce that I didn't, but that's kind of where I was at with it too.
Nah, sorry, no secret sauce, I'm afraid. The only thing I could think of off the top of my head, but we'd have to test that, of course, is to give them access to the whole site, but then take them out of all the parts of the site you don't want them to have access to. But that gets a bit messy as well. So I don't know.
It turns into a management nightmare at that point.
It does. It does. At which point should I turn my conditional access policies from report only to Valhalla Brothers? When you have checked your report only reports and you feel comfortable that they are achieving what they should be achieving and nothing else. Now, this is a good question. For SMB customers where E3, E5 for all users may be cost prohibitive, does it make sense to add security related add-on plans a la carte? No, it doesn't. However, what you should do is using Business Premium, right? Because it includes a bunch of good security features. And then you can add Hornet Security on top of that. How was that, Andy? Was that good marketing for Hornet Security?
It was. I'm impressed.
was a smooth transition in there, wasn't it? I'm going to bounce over the next question to you, Andy, about security profile, ISO 27001, SOC, iTrust, etc. certified.
Yeah, so Rick, that's a good question. If you want to go ahead and punch in a number 3 into the questions form and hit enter, we've got some cert documentation that we can send over to you that covers all of those questions for you. Tells you exactly, which ones we're certified with, et cetera, et cetera. We'll make sure we get that over to you.
And then we had a good question around Defender for Endpoint. Somebody was saying it has a stigma. That is actually the Defender, Windows Defender, which had a bit of a stigma a few years ago as being very basic. Defender for Endpoint, so that is the EDR, centrally managed, full machine learning, both in the cloud and on the endpoint based solution that is now available for macOS, Linux, Windows, iOS, and Android. It is a very capable security solution today, and it routinely wins over some of the others like CrowdStrike, etc. in competition. It's also, or in tests rather, it also includes threat and vulnerability management, so it will identify all the pieces of software on all your endpoints that are vulnerable to newly discovered or old ones, if you haven't updated for a while, problems. So it's very capable solution, and it's included in business as Defender for Business since a couple of months. Yeah.
One other one that I saw here, a question by Leo asking, we can register as, can you register as an MSP with Hornet Security products?
Yeah.
Yes, you can. So we are multi-tenants out of the box, so it works very well for MSPs. Again, Leo, if you want to go ahead and press a number 3 in the questions form and press enter, we'll have somebody get back with you on exactly what that MSP registration process looks like and give you more information on that.
Right. So I think we are six minutes over time. We might want to.
Yeah, I think we've pretty much covered all the ones. And again, if you asked a question you did not get an answer for, we always, again, do some sort of follow-up piece of content that contains a full list of the questions and their associated answers. Other than that, yeah, I want to let you all get back to your day. Paul, I want to make sure I thank you for coming and sharing all your knowledge on this. It's always great having you, my friend, and I'm sure we'll have you on for another webinar here at some point in the near future, definitely. So, but all of you that are watching, thanks for joining us again today, and we hope to see you again for a future Hornet Security webinar. Have a great day.